there's this friction between privacy and child protection. Parents need help. They don't need judgment. 40% of 12 to 16-year-olds said that they had encountered cyberbullying. There's a red button that you can press and it collects all of the communication with that particular contact into a zipped file and you can just send it.
Welcome to the Siren Investigates podcast. So just to introduce people who haven't seen the podcast before, Siren Investigates podcast talks about people and technologies, an interesting trend in the investigative world. I'm joined today by Rena Maycock, the CEO and founder of CHIRP. I'm delighted to have Rena here because Rena works at the intersection of AI, technology and child protection, something really interesting to our audience. She's an award-winning founder. She has won the Women in AI Person of the Year, Best Application of AI for Social Good, a number of other awards, raised millions of euro for her initiative for her company, and we're excited to hear about that. But I think the most interesting thing is really doing good with technology, really doing good in terms of bringing technology together with the problem of child protection online. And look, to start off, Rena, just paint us a picture of the scale of the problem, you know, in terms of children go online. We keep hearing the stories, but from your industry's perspective, you're very deep in this. Tell us about what your average person doesn't know, you know, the scale of the problem we face and the challenge that that your company is really trying to fix. You know, give us some perspective.
Thank you for having me. We started this journey about 7 years ago, and it happened to coincide with the rise in awareness that parents were having of the problems that children were facing when they went online, the dangers that they were coming across. And the three big problem domains that parents were concerned about were when they gave their child a smartphone, they were afraid they would be groomed, they were afraid they'd be cyberbullied and access suicide and self-harm material. And what surprised me when I started to look into the data was parents were afraid their child would access pornography, spend too much time online, yes, but equally they were afraid they would be groomed or cyberbullied. So even 7 years ago, it was quite shocking to me, the awareness around it. Now, the reason I started the company was because when I started having kids, I started seeing headlines of kids that had been systematically cyberbullied, groomed, sextorted from, coerced, and pushed into the irreversible. There was one tipping point. There was a young boy in Belfast who had been honey trapped and sextorted from, and he ended up killing himself. And that terrified me, even though my kids were only toddlers. And I was thinking, it's only a matter of time before they're knocking on the door looking for a smartphone. I mean, the march of technology can't be held back, right? I mean, it's getting worse. It's not getting any better. 20% of 5-year-olds have their own smartphone. And that's an Ofcom figure from the UK. It happened to be backed up by our own research. And our research came out at 21%. And we were like, surely there was definitely a glitch. The sample size wasn't big enough. But then when we looked into it, it was backed up by the Ofcom data, which have a massive sample size. And so smartphone ownership is only on the rise. And then it was around the big tipping point, arguably 7 years ago. We struggled to get financing 7 years ago because we were a combination of deep tech and AI. We knew it would cost about 4 million for us to get to market. 4 million is a fruity seed raise anywhere in the world. In Ireland, it's virtually impossible. But the tipping point happened to come around COVID time. And it was, I think, July 21. Ylva Johansson, which is a European commissioner, came out and launched an initiative to tackle online child sexual abuse material. And that's when it really kind of gathered pace in Europe. And when legislation gathers pace, everybody else is racing to keep up. And the reason she launched that initiative was because within the 3 months of COVID hitting, there was a very, very sharp spike in online child sexual abuse material, CSAM. And that was because children were spending so much more time unsupervised online because parents were working, everybody was at home. And there were children as young as 3 taking part in their own online child abuse, you know, videoing themselves. So part of that initiative they came out with was a derogation for the privacy directive, for example, and that would free up social media companies to somewhat look into, or not necessarily invade a child's privacy, but circumvent the legislation to make sure that they could detect CSAM and report it in a speedy fashion. I remember at the time there was, I think, a Swedish guy on the dark web that they'd managed to capture a quote from him on the dark web, and he said, "Thank you, COVID, now the children are so much more easy to find." And it was chilling. I'd say you just got a chill. I got a chill when I read that. I was like, oh my God, it's horrendous. So I think parents, given the research that's out there, the awareness that parents have, that I'll give you an example. CyberSafe Kids did a research study there recently, and 40% of 12 to 16-year-olds said that they had encountered cyberbullying. Right. Now, we all kind of think this might be an outlier. It might be 5% of children. Yeah. It's not 5% of children. It's 40%. 7% of children have experienced grooming, adolescents, and that was a Spanish study. And then 10% had experienced self-harm. Right. I think that was 12 to 15-year-olds. So these are not micro issues for the outliers in society, the lonely. They're not exceptions. Yeah. They're fast becoming the rule. And unfortunately, big tech has not responded the way we would all want them to. We would all want self-regulation to work. It hasn't worked. So therefore, legislation is being brought into work. And some of that legislation is quite toothy. There's the Online Safety Act in the UK is quite toothy. Yeah. Ofcom are managing that. And even the language they come out with in the press statements is aggressive.
Right.
They mean business.
And do you see big tech responding to that legislation? What do you see in terms of, when you started on this journey, I'm sure it wasn't a priority for big tech. Is it becoming a bigger priority?
It has to. They have no choice, certainly in Europe. Right. In the US, arguably, they're entering a deregulation phase, where free speech is going to be much more important, and free speech is important. All the child protection stakeholders would say, though, for example, a few years ago, UNICEF came out. There's this friction between privacy and child protection. Yeah. Child protection stakeholders over here say, take every measure you can, by whatever means necessary, protect children online from online child sexual abuse, which is the most pervasive. And then the privacy people over here are saying, no, data is sacrosanct. You cannot look at it for any reason. Now, my view is the juice is worth the squeeze. If you're going to stop my 8-year-old daughter from videoing herself in her bedroom and sending it to a blob in a basement in Belgium, I'm fine with her privacy being invaded as long as her PII is removed, her personal identifiable information. So even UNICEF came out a few years ago and said, if this issue online is to be tackled efficiently and effectively, some level of filtering is going to need to be done. Yeah. Client-side scanning, it's the only way it can be done, and that's what we do. But it can be done in a way that both polars can meet somewhere in the middle and shake hands and say it can be done in a safe way where privacy is protected and the rights of the child to privacy is maintained. But there's always going to be this friction. Is the child's right to be safe online of more value than the child's right to privacy?
Yeah. Interesting. And in this world with such a scale of problem, parents are really at sea, I'm sure. What's your perspective on, what parents can do today? Or are they waiting for technologies like you're bringing out? Or, what can parents do in this dangerous environment for their children?
A number of things. I mean, there's a huge movement here. You would have seen it, John, and it made the news actually in the States a couple of years ago, the smartphone pledge.
Sure.
So that smartphone pledge, on average, a child gets their first phone at age 11.7. There's children that get it at 5. There's parents that somehow manage to hold out to 15 or 16. But parents need help. They don't need judgment. Yeah. And there's a lot of judgment. If you see an 8-year-old with their own smartphone, and you kind of go, oh, that's, get a bit judgy about it.
Yeah.
But you don't know what the situation is for that parent. The parent can really only continue to say no to the child for as long as the majority of the class doesn't have a phone.
Yeah.
As soon as it tips over into the majority of the class has a phone, ironically, you're setting the child up to be bullied by, harassed by exclusion. Because they're not taking part in the Snapchat, the WhatsApp groups, all that, and they just aren't available. Like the communication tools aren't available to them. So this smartphone pledge gained legs a few years ago. It's a network of schools out in Delgany and Greystones here in Dublin and Wicklow. And it was a group of parents that came together and they tried to get agreement across the school network from all of the parents to say, okay, if everybody signs this pledge, will you commit to not giving your child a phone until they get into secondary school?
Sure.
And what grade would that be in the States? Would that be, I think is it grade 8 maybe, or grade 9, something like that? And just over, I think, 90% of the parents agreed.
Wow.
But then there was some of the parents just said, no, this is draconian. There's no need for this. I've got a great relationship with my child. I feel I can trust them to have a phone.
Sure.
And in some cases that might be true. There are different levels of maturity when it comes to children. So sometimes the broad strokes don't really make all that much of a difference.
Yeah.
But I mean, you see governments all over the world trying to help parents in this way or show parents that they're trying to take action in the absence of action by the big tech companies themselves, right? So while we wait for all of the social media giants, the VLOPs, to absolutely conclusively use their powers for good and create products for use by children that are safe. Yeah. Until then, legislators need to kind of feel they need to step in. So you get the likes of the Digital Services Act, the Online Safety Act. And you might have seen in Australia there recently, they banned social media for children under 16. Now, child protection stakeholders, immediately when I heard of that, because my view, my goal is, as the parent of an 8 and 9-year-old, they don't have smartphones. They won't until they're in secondary school. But at that stage, I don't think I'll be able to stop them from having smartphones. Yeah. And I don't think it would be right, because my view is, and this is a personal view, I think children should be able to enjoy all of the benefits that go along with technology and smartphone use. The educational benefits, the communication, all of those things, the entertainment. But parents they just feel at sea. They feel like they need a backup. So if it's a case that they need this legislation to stop their children, at least on the surface, from having access to social media companies, the parent can say to their child, look, it's against the law for you to be on Snapchat or TikTok or whatever. Yeah. But child protection stakeholders would always say, if you restrict access too much, if it's over restrictive, you will simply push your child into secret internet use. They will go and buy a burner phone and you will have no visibility at all. So you're far better off as a parent, taking the approach that I will come along on this journey with you. We'll collaborate on this. Fine, you can have your phone, but let's have conditions around it. Yeah. When I'm explaining CHIRP to people, they say, do you think you'll get the buy-in from kids? And we're like, look, we will always say this is a safe first phone for children. Yeah. It would be unrealistic for us to expect a 15-year-old who's already had a phone to reverse into any type of monitoring at all. So this is the first phone. And we were all used to, as children, conditionality when we were allowed to do something for the first time. Yeah. Mom, can I have a phone? Yes, but it has to have CHIRP on it, because at least then I know you can use your phone, unfettered access, but if you're in danger, I'll be told, and we'll work through it together. I always liken it to when I was like 8, my friends were all allowed to walk around to the shop and I wasn't, because my mother wrapped me up in cotton wool, and which is exactly what I'm going to try and do with my kids. But eventually I was bugging her, pester power. And eventually she said, okay, fine. It's a 17-minute walk around to the shop. Wow. And it's a 17-minute walk back. You'll have 4 minutes to pick out your sweets, maximum 6. So you need to get around there and back again in 40 minutes. If you're even a minute over the 40, you're never going again. Yeah. And by God, I was around there and back in 40 minutes. Because kids are used to conditionality. It's the same thing as getting a lock on a door. There's a trust around it. But the parent always has their own key just in case, in case of emergency, break glass kind of thing. But there's always conditionality around the first time to do something.
And so you've touched on why you started CHIRP, right? But tell us about CHIRP. What does it do? What's your vision for it? How is CHIRP going to address this problem? And, let's go a bit deeper on the technology and where you see fitting in this world.
So originally when the idea first came to me I became terrified, I started to teach myself. In truth, I'm not a technologist, and I was thinking surely technology can handle this problem for parents. It seemed blindingly obvious. I'm a salesperson. I'm a commercial CEO. So I was thinking of the selling opportunity, because you ask any parent, what are you afraid of, cyberbullying and grooming? If I were to give you a product that could stop your child being cyberbullied and groomed, would you buy it?
Yeah.
Take my money. So I was thinking, if we build it, they'll come. Surely somebody is doing this. So I started to teach myself about the technology. I looked into the market, the state of the art. Back then, as it is now, are parental control apps. There are about 250 parental control apps on the app stores. Wow. They share a variety of functions. They've got access restriction and monitoring to stop your child become addicted to their phone, pornography blocking for obvious reasons, and geofencing and geo-tracking, so you can find your child if they have their phone on them. Some of them say they deal with cyberbullying and grooming, but actually, if you look under the hood, what they do is they track, and they say track or monitor contacts. Right. So what they'll do is they will say, send you an alert and say your child has added a new contact to WhatsApp. But the problem with apps is apps operate on a peer-to-peer system. Right. They have the same permissions levels as each other. Yeah. So no parental control app will ever be able to access data within other apps. Oh, wow. So cyberbullying and grooming in the main happens in messaging apps and in social media platforms on your child, for example, on your child's own social media posts. Quite often grooming and cyberbullying happens in those comments. Yeah. So you can download all of the best in show of parental control apps, but they sit at the same level as social media
They're
apps.
Outside observing.
They're outside observing. And there's very, very little they can do. So if you want to tackle cyberbullying and grooming, you have to access data within those apps. And the earliest point in the stack that you can access all incoming and outgoing data is the kernel level. So that's what we did. We developed a patented operating system modification at the kernel level. And it's at that point we can access all incoming and outgoing data. And then, so that's the deep tech side. Yeah. And then we compare it against our AI-driven databases. So we're building small language models that are very domain specific in the 3 domains of cyberbullying, grooming, suicide and self-harm, multimodal. So we're going video, image and text. Okay. So anything that fails the test, we block it, we stop it from appearing on the screen, we send the child an alert and say, we've blocked what we believe to be a cyberbullying message and we've sent your parent an alert. You get an alert and we say, we think we've stopped this. Go to the phone with the child, have a look at it, and here's how you deal with it together. So we're trying to create a product that reduces familial friction around smartphone use, because at the moment there's this tension around, okay, you can have your first phone, but you're only having it for half an hour a day, and anytime I want to pick that phone up, I can. And they go, okay, because they'd say mass to get their first phone. Yeah. But then as soon as they have the phone, after a week, it's like, oh, but Dad, all my friends have their phone for an hour a day and their parents trust them and they don't need to hand up their phone. Oh, so the boundaries are constantly being pushed. And if they weren't, there'd be something wrong with your kids. So anyway, that's natural. So we wanted to create this product where we're not spying on the child, because again, the spying is pushing them into secret internet use, but where they feel empowered, trusted, independent, and like they're in control of their own online safety. Children don't want to be groomed. They don't want to be sextorted from or bullied or, served self-harm or suicide material. They want to be kept safe. So it's important to bring them along on the journey. So at the moment, actually, and I was saying we can demo this now. So what we've developed is a camera intercept. And that was a really important piece, because whatever about the language, cyberbullying can be detected in detecting language. Yeah. So the important piece in the grooming attempts is generally a grooming attempt, they follow a certain pattern. A blob in a basement will contact your child on their open Instagram page or Facebook or Roblox or whatever, and invite the child into a messaging app that's usually encrypted. And they'll say this is out of the reach of scrutiny. So, and then it really is out of the reach of scrutiny by moderators or any sort of big tech filters. And then they'll develop trust. They'll use phraseology like, I'm like you. My parents I had a problem with my parents too. They didn't understand me either. And, we're the same, you and me. And they develop trust. Once they've developed the trust, then they ask for a nude image. And then the first nude image to go out, that is the tipping point in a grooming attempt, because then that image is used to blackmail the child either for money or for more images or for video. I don't know whether you saw the case of that girl over in the States, that young girl who took her own life, being groomed by a 26-year-old guy in Northern Ireland. But he was grooming hundreds of children, generally meeting them on places like Snapchat. And what actually ended up happening with her was she was pushed to suicide because he was trying to get her to abuse her sister on video. So, and that's what the tipping point for her was. But if we can stop the first nude image from being sent, which we can demonstrate now that we can detect a nude image in WhatsApp.
And so you're able to get right to the kernel and see it.
Correct.
You know, outside of any controls of the secure app itself, because you're right in the core of the phone itself.
Correct.
Fantastic.
So before it gets
how did you
to
do
the
that?
screen.
How did you get into the core?
Well, I'd have to bring my CTO to explain it entirely, and that would be our secret sauce. What we basically do is we stop it after it leaves the app before it's painted to screen.
Fantastic. That's great.
Ultimately. So that's what that's our intercept.
And that's your core differentiator to those 250 apps out there, because they're observing you're in line of the
we're getting into the queue.
Right.
You know? We're getting into the queue. And that's how we detect it. So we've trained our nudity detection model on adult nude imagery, but we're working with an NGO in the UK who have hashed data sets of CSAM material to make sure that we can catch child nude imagery as well. Yeah. So once that we intercept that tipping point and we stop that image from being sent, we discard it. Yeah. You can't save that image because that could cause, this is the intricacy of and the delicacy of this solution is, if you stop a child from sending a nude image, but then tell the child that you've detected the nude image, that could cause a catastrophic event.
Right.
Oh
interesting.
my God, what's my parent going to do?
Yeah.
What is my parent going to do?
Okay.
So we're working with the Anti-Bullying Research Centre and, Professor James O'Higgins-Norman, who's the UNESCO chair for the prevention of bullying in schools and cyberspace. So all of the social scientists are helping us to develop even the notifications.
Right.
That's how delicate the entire system has to be.
Yeah.
So that... And for example, we also can now demonstrate that we have a query intercept for browser searches. So if your child goes on and looks for pro-Anna or pro-Mia, which is anorexia and bulimia, and those types of things, or express an interest in cutting or burning or something, we direct them immediately to our support page and we send you an alert and we say, your child is expressing an interest in anorexia. So the whole point of CHIRP is early interception before there's a catastrophic event. Yeah. So if you know that your daughter, for example, is expressing an interest in extreme dieting, that's the start of something that could end up being something catastrophic. So if you can address it now and go and get her help, that's much better than finding out when she's emaciated.
Fascinating. So what it sounds like is CHIRP isn't just about technology, it's also knowing what to do once you catch an event, because a lot of people could catch an event but do the wrong thing with it because it's such a sensitive problem. You could, so I'm sure over the years you've spent a lot of time thinking about what to do when we find a picture that's going out in a phone.
The technology is that's the disruptive piece. That's the innovative piece. That's what gets us the awards and the accolade, all that kind of stuff. And that's what will get us our funding. But ultimately, there's no point if it doesn't protect children. Yeah. If it's anti-family, if it's if children feel like their privacy is being invaded, or if their enjoyment of their for example, we were dealing with our model is to license to telcos who will then they already have the relationship with the end consumer, the parent. So I was talking to one of the tier 1 telcos and he did an introduction for me with a massive OEM that they want us to work with. And I was looking down the chain of the email, as you do, out of nosiness. And he had said, you should see this technology at work. I had gone and done the demonstration for him. And he was like, you should see this. This is incredible technology. And it's within an instant. Now, for us, we've always thought that no lag was really important because, the child can't have any perceived interruption to their service because you'll get user rejection then. But it was interesting to see someone really high up in a telco think that this was the major selling point.
Okay.
The major selling point
was so interested in the
technology. It can be done, but within 100 milliseconds.
Okay.
He was really impressed by the speed at which it was. It could be done. But yeah, the messaging is very, very important, and we really need to get that right.
Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating. We see that at Siren the whole time. Is you can have great technology, but you don't have the domain experience to know what to do with it. Then it can create conflicts and it can create friction in the process. And it's really interesting to hear what you've done is learned what's an appropriate alert. Is as important as how fast you get that alert.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why we partnered with DCU and the Anti-Bullying Research Centre, is because, our team, we've got a big team of engineers, but they're all engineers, they're not social scientists. And the important piece is bringing the kids along with us on the journey. And that's even down to language. For example, we are putting a really rigorous plan together on, I'll give you an example, on GDPR. And the equivalent being COPPA in the States. There's certain compliance that we need to go around. We need to get consent from the parent, and the parent can consent on behalf of the child up to a certain point. But we're going one further than the legislation compels us to, and we're looking for explicit agreement from the child as well, because we want them to feel ownership. However, if we get a 6-year-old that's using CHIRP, how do you explain to a 6-year-old what an agreement is, or consent, or assent? So it's a language issue. And we will be setting different settings for, so the user journey is you walk into a Vodafone or a Verizon or AT&T and you say, I want a safe smartphone for my child, and they say, here's a CHIRP enabled Samsung Galaxy A52. You bring it home, you find it in settings, it's there where Wi-Fi and roaming is, so it can't be deleted by a tech-savvy teen. And then you download a parent provisioning app to your phone, and it's a very, very simple 5-step process. So one of the big issues with parental control is that the European Commission found, they did a benchmarking of parental control study a few years ago, and they found that you need a computer science degree to set them up. You really do. So, our model is extremely simple. It's one child, one user, one device. And that's how we license it. So you download your app, you open it up, you switch it on, you enter the date of birth of your child, password protect it, link it to your email address and click apply. That's it. So if your child is 6, the settings are appropriate for a 6-year-old, for example. We wouldn't let a curse word through. Or if your child is 12, obviously they will be much looser. And we're keeping all of that appropriate content thing in mind, because again, if you are babying a 12-year-old, they will perceive that to be babying, exactly what it is. And they'll say, oh, they're not even letting curse words through. And my friends say the S word or whatever it is. And they want a realistic experience with their smartphone and not obvious intrusion. So it's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah. So Rena, congratulations on the fundraising you've done. I think €4.4 million now you've raised.
Yeah.
So tell us about that process and, the fun side of it. What are you going to spend it on? How are you going to help scale CHIRP and what's your vision going forward?
Yeah, I gave myself a 1.5-year hiatus from raising, and it was delightful to just do CEOing for a while. So yeah, look, it took us a good number of years, and we knew at that type of quantum we would need to de-risk the investment proposition for investors, So we applied for Horizon 2020, which is a big European grant program, got 4 seals of excellence, which means extremely close but no cigar. And then we eventually got the Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund. So we got a €2.8 million non-dilutive grant from the DTIF. And that's a highly competitive process and all that kind of stuff. So we were delighted with that. But we still had to co-fund that with a private raise. So we ended up oversubscribed. We got a 1.67 million raise, all from angels. And we kicked off our 2-year development runway in May 23. So since then, we've been meeting all of our development milestones. It's really glorious now. We're going back into raising again a Series A. And I'm a salesperson, so I do enjoy all of this, but
sure.
it is stressful. I've got a team now that are waiting, like there's mouths to feed. So there is pressure down the end of next year. We don't need the money right now, but it's taking everybody a bit of time to close raises. So I'll be going out to Silicon Valley now in January to do that. But it's great to be able to. And I was in Dubai recently, in Helsinki, and it's really wonderful to now be able to bring the devices with us, because it's working on, Pixel, it's working on Samsung, and we can demonstrate real-time live filtering of an image, offensive image or offensive message in WhatsApp, for example, Discord, etc. So it's really great now to be able to go in front of people and say, here, I'll just show you how it works. And, I take their mobile number and I say, okay, you play with it, bully me, and Or, here's a nude image. Well, a scantily clad woman is how we demonstrate it, because we've had to train on adult nude imagery. But we can demonstrate all this, and the gasps are fantastic. Whereas, when I was raising this round for the first 5 years when I was trying to raise money, it was in the main hypotheticals. I was saying, this is what we're going to do with our money.
It wasn't as real as it is now.
No. And we had a patent and we had a, very basic prototype. But now that we can demonstrate all 3 problem domains, that we can solve them all. Now it's just execution. Now it's just making it work on, as many devices as possible, as many apps as possible. And so it's just execution. So it's a much better place for us to be because we can articulate it. And particularly when parents sit in front of us and they immediately are thinking, and what are you going to do with emoticons? And they're thinking about their own child and how smart they are. And they're going, I know my child is they're going to be trying a workaround here.
Yeah.
And what about if they're inserting special characters and numbers? And look, what we always kind of say to them is, look, a child that's determined is going to be able to circumvent this. Yeah. It's never going to be 100%. It's, you and I will remember the old Domestos ads where it's like it kills 99.9% of germs, because they can never say conclusively that it's 100%.
Sure.
But we'll go to market with 75% detection efficiency, which is as close as human level as damn it. But as soon as we get
way
more
ahead
users,
of what's out there today.
Correct.
Yeah.
But as soon as we get users in the wild using this. If you imagine this, right, so your child has their phone and we detect a cyberbullying message. We invite you to go to the phone with the child and you tell us whether we got it right or wrong. Yeah. So you are feeding our algorithm all the time and it is being refined. So our detection efficiency will get us up as close as damn it to 100%. Yeah,
because you're doing it every minute of every day.
Doing it. And for every one user, we've got 2 moderators, the parent and child. Okay. So, and for example, if we detect a child is sending a nude image, there might be an instance where that child is in a consenting sexual relationship with another 15-year-old and they're going out and blah, blah, blah. It's still a useful segue for you to be able to have a conversation with the child and say, now do you understand the permanency of sending a nude image of yourself out into the ether? Because that's there forever. And you have that natural segue. And if you didn't know what was going on in your child's life, now you do. But yeah, it's really nice to be able to demonstrate to parents, here is how this will work. Yeah. And particularly girls, I mean, there's so girls, I think they're 80% more likely to be cyberbullied. Right. But there's a phenomenon now, which you probably are aware of, called pig butchering. Yes. Yep. So, and that is, parents that I talk to they're like, what? If they're not in this space, they don't understand what it is. And you say, look, this is on an industrial scale, honey trapping, coercion, sextortion. And I think in ways, education in schools is somewhat catching up a little bit. Yeah. I've heard of some instances. So it used to be second or third hand. The way you used to hear about my friend's brother's wife's brother had a kid in a school and this happened. Now it's kind of first hand. Now a guy whose child has gone through this.
Because it's so pervasive.
Because it's so pervasive now.
Yeah.
And they are quite shocked. But I heard of an incident there only last week where it was a young guy, 13 years old, and he went to his dad and said, I did something really stupid. I thought it was another girl. I thought it was a 13-year-old girl. She showed me hers. I was trying to show her mine. And now I'm being blackmailed. And the dad got on to the guy and said, I'm going to come and find you. Did a bit of a Liam Neeson on it. And he just went away. Because the threat was, if you don't give me money, go and get your mum's credit card. If you don't give me money, I'm going to put this up on your public Facebook and all your friends and family are going to know how disgusting you are.
Yeah, and given how threatening these interactions are with children, and given how highly illegal they are, talk to me about the interaction that your product can have with law enforcement and how it connects into the overall investigation process. Like the world we live in is where you're trying to connect one piece of disconnected data from here to something else, to something else, to something else, to find a network, to find a pattern, to see if this is a person acting on their own or they're acting in concert with a whole whole gang or if it's a bigger conspiracy. Do you think CHIRP can play a role in that and connect to that type of investigative process?
Yes, is the answer. And very early days. I mean, when we were putting our applications together for the DTIF and for Horizon 2020, a big part of those funding programs is that you can evidence that you are working towards a societal good. I mean, the societal good for CHIRP is very evidence, is very obvious. Sure. But we wanted to go a little bit further, and we were talking to a few of the guys in the likes of Interpol that worked in child sex trafficking to see what the big pain points were. And was there something that we could build in that could assist? And I remember at the time, now this is going back a few years, and I'm not sure if it's still the case, but at that time globally, the delay between a person reporting a grooming attempt on a child and actual investigation stroke prosecution was about 9 months, because the process was my child's
faster than I thought it would be. But
yeah. But I remember dealing with the cyber forensics guys in I think they were in Harcourt Street at the time. The building isn't even there anymore. I think they had 12 in their unit, but really under-resourced. So the process at the time was you would go into a police station, you'd say, I think my child's been groomed, and the bag is put in a jiffy bag, or the phone is putting it in a jiffy bag and put on a shelf, and you wait for it to be processed until somebody has the time. So what we did to deal with that and to help law enforcement was we are creating a red button function, so that if you do go to the phone with your child and you go, okay, this is a blob in a basement somewhere, or pig butchering in action, there's a red button that you can press and it collects all of the communication with that particular contact into a zipped file, and you can just send it by email. So there's the necessity for a deep dive on a phone without direction is mitigated somehow. And that would go some way towards improving the time frame from reporting to prosecution.
No, that'd be great.
It makes it much easier.
So it's going away from the little handwritten book and notes with a phone on the shelf to something far more automated.
Yes, exactly. And look, and so we start with the 3 problem domains of cyberbullying, grooming, suicide, and so on. It's the lowest hanging fruit because that's what parents really want. They're very, very afraid of. However, we have at this point proven that we can access these apps. So we can improve and increase the suite of services. So, for example, in Ireland, it's not a problem. But in the UK, I'll give you as an example, radicalisation is a big issue. There's an organisation called Prevent, which I'm sure you know all about, and 25% of their referrals are children under 15. Wow. So it is an issue there in the UK, and probably an issue maybe in the States and possibly in Germany and around Europe. So we can then simply add a radicalisation database to the suite of services, and we can detect if your child is being contacted and attempts to radicalise them. So that will be something. Now, that's something that we're looking at for down the line. It's not
fantastic, but yeah, it sounds like what you're doing then can really fit into the law enforcement workflow. It can fit into different online problems like that radicalization, which is very different to child exploitation, but it's almost just a different language, but still a bad outcome for the child.
Correct. But we leave the decision making up to the parents. Sure. We can't be the arbiters. I use the example of 2 consenting 15-year-olds, for example. We can't set up any sort of automatic reporting because, first of all, from a commercial standpoint, it simply wouldn't fly with parents that they could get a knock on the door from a guard or a policeman saying there's child sexual abuse material. I mean, that automatic kind of reporting was floated a little bit with Apple did an experiment a few years ago on automatic client-side scanning of photo libraries, and it did not
didn't
work.
Fly.
No.
And in terms of solving this problem, what do you think of, private companies, government agencies, law enforcement? Is there conversations happening across all of them? Are people coming to a consensus? Is there more collaboration happening across government and private companies, or where do you see that in
I would like
conversation?
to see an awful lot more.
Okay.
I would like to see an awful lot more. Yeah. I think the people that are kind of they're not being left out, but haven't fully embraced that collaborative spirit is probably law enforcement. Yeah. out of a bit of fear of maybe sharing too much data, reprisal, that kind of stuff. I think there's an awful lot of goodwill between government and enterprise. I think both understand how they can help each other. I'll give you an example of how this has kind of frustrated our efforts. I mentioned we're building these small language models of cyberbullying, grooming, suicide and self-harm data. It's very, very difficult to get gold standard data. Anybody in AI will tell you that the very worst, the biggest stumbling block that is causing a restriction in progress is the inability to get hands-on gold standard data. It's very, very difficult. When we started out this project, we said we were going to do a big public campaign. We were going to invite parents to submit their verbatim examples of cyberbullying language, etc. And we did a huge campaign. It could not have been more successful from a publicity perspective. We were all over the news. We were all over the papers, all over radio. Tumbleweed.
Yeah, people don't want to give that kind
tumbleweed.
of information.
And I remember speaking to our UNESCO partner, James O'Higgins Norman, and he said he reckoned we were the victim of our own success. There's a perception that if you get a lot of publicity, parents will sit back and say, everybody else is going to do that. I don't need to do this. So we have worked with the Irish Rugby Football Union. We've worked with the GAA here in Ireland, all these big sporting institutions, the National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals, who have all sent our survey out very kindly because they believe in what we're doing. And we've been eking out the
Chipping
data.
away. Yeah.
But I mean, this is going on a year.
Yeah.
And now that means that once we get out the other end, it'll be very ethically sourced data, really, truly gold standard data, and there will be huge value in it.
Yeah.
And we finally see now why. If you look into the research, like any open source data sets of cyberbullying language, there's very little.
Sure.
Even in the English language. In other languages, there's virtually nil.
Yeah, so it's a real multilingual problem you're dealing with.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, the reason I mention this is because there are data sets of grooming language in the possession of some law enforcement agencies. Sure. And trying to get access to them is virtually impossible.
That's proprietary
yeah.
information for them.
But I don't think they care about the proprietary nature of it. I mean, we're all obsessed with proprietary this and proprietary that. We're private enterprises and we're trying to create value.
Or maybe
for
sensitive
investors.
is a better word than proprietary.
Sensitive, but there's just fear.
Sure.
What is going to happen if I share this? And we, no matter what we say about, we'll anonymize it, we'll remove all PII, we'll automatically scrub, then we'll add, human moderation to make sure everything is gone. No. But getting access to that data, even with all of the PII removed, would improve our detection capability by a number of %. But that, they're kind of the key, or the one player where there should possibly be some sort of framework implemented that makes them feel better about sharing that information, some sort of process.
And given the progress you've made over the last 7 years, what advice would you have for somebody that's either dealing with law enforcement or dealing with child protection or, the startup journey you've been on? What lessons have you learned that you'd pass to the next generation that's solving an adjacent problem? But what would you say?
I wouldn't want to scare them off. Sure. That's the thing. To be honest, I really enjoy this journey. I didn't think it would take this long. Yeah. You when you have something as noble as this, if I do say so myself, protecting children. When I came up with the concept early doors, everyone was thinking, everyone's going to be throwing money at you. Everybody wants to solve this problem. But it just didn't quite get there for about 5 years until there's a legislative tipping point.
Sure.
And your timing
People
is
must address
100% right.
Yeah.
Once the law is knocking on the door, then all of a sudden everyone sees the value. 7 years ago, we were talking about creating small language models. We were calling them something else, but ultimately they became small language models. But that's very much part of the zeitgeist now. Everybody's talking about that. So we are the technology du jour at the moment, but 7 years ago we weren't. I would say get your timing right. Make sure you do. When I started this off, I had no eyes on what was in the pipeline from a legislative perspective. Maybe I would have slowed down. Maybe I would have concentrated more on getting stakeholder support, doing a little bit more kind of on the building of the data sets, like the non-tech stuff in preparation for the tidal wave. But I would say try and get your timing right. And I would say to everybody, just ask. Right. Nobody's going to come knocking on your door. You need to bang on the doors and ask. And in an ideal world, if I'm honest, CHIRP wouldn't be needed. Sure. And we'll do everything we can to eradicate the needs. Yes, we're a commercial organisation, but our mission is, yes, to get a return for our investors, but ultimately it's to protect as many kids as we possibly can. I'll give you an example. Our commercial model that we put together for, Western Europe and the United States, where 75% of the parental control market is between those two areas. We'll have a high margin, low volume model. Yeah. But when we want to go into emerging markets where GDP per capita might be less than $30,000 a head, and average revenue per user for a telco might be $5 a month, we want to make sure that cost isn't a barrier. So we go low margin, high volume, and we kind of we push the burden of the compute onto that entity so we can have a kind of a split revenue model. So ultimately, our mission is dual focused, and we want to protect as many kids as we possibly can.
Fantastic. So longer term, what's your vision for the digital world? What will it look like down the line? In the dream circumstance, every social media platform would properly, adequately moderate the content that is on there and make sure it's truly age appropriate, and not just on a surface level. You will see a lot of noise made around by the VLOP saying, "Oh, we're doing every." What does VLOP stand for? Very large online platform. Sorry, it's social media. And Google, etc. They will say they do everything they possibly can to make sure that the users are of age. They'll use age assurance technologies as much as they possibly can. For example, you will see some of them say, we detected 5 million accounts that we believe to be, children under 13, and we've closed down those accounts. But there's very little transparency around it, because that's 5 million of how many do you think are children under 13? So there's an awful lot of bluster around it. To be honest, until social media platforms do not look at our children as consumers, I don't really see much changing, unfortunately, because they do look at our children as consumers. Yeah, as an asset. But they shouldn't. Right. So I don't know. Legislation is just going to have to enforce it. Sure. And what advice in the meantime would you give parents who are facing this tsunami and they're waiting for technologies to get onto phones like CHIRP? Yeah. What can they do in the short term? We did a deal with our neighbours across the road. Okay. Let's bring it local. My 9-year-old son wants a games console. Most of his friends have games consoles, and a lot of the kids, I just see them. They become like zombies. They're really entrapped by these games consoles. So we did a deal with the best friend across the road, the parents, and we said, I presume you're not allowing your man to look for a switch off Santa. And it was like, no, we're not. Are you? No, we're not. Next year? They were like, okay, deal. My advice to parents is do deals with other parents to try and stave off technology as much as possible. If they can't do that, absolutely download a parental control. Talk to your child all the time. Try to hold off on smartphones until they're in secondary school. Children they lack the emotional equipment to deal with the content that they are being served. Yeah. And at the very least, if they're in their teens, they're a little bit further on than if they're 8 or 9. Okay, fantastic. And look, just to wrap up, I think what we've covered a whole series of topics here today, from your startup story, the journey you've been on, the problems that you're addressing in terms of getting right into the phone, getting that picture before it goes out, those parental controls, the role of big tech in that, the role of government, the role of society, how you can educate society, how it links back into law enforcement, how it connects to our type of user in the Siren world around the investigative technology, how we can put that whole picture together for the investigative world. But it's just been a fantastic conversation. And Rena, thanks for coming down to Galway and talking to us on the Siren Investigates podcast. Thank you so much for having me.